Hey, team players, and welcome back. Oh, I'm excited for today, Bob. That draft, obviously, it goes down in real life. It is an exciting thing. So, we're going to talk about a lot of fantasy events that happen as a result of the draft. And if you're with us live, obviously shooting your individual players, because today's episode is all about players stuck who went up or down. If they're interesting to you, we want to talk about it. This is going to be through the lights of PPR Standard and Dynasty, trying to hit them all for you there. And, you know, Bob, I'm really excited for the draft. I think I want to hit the big elephant in the room before we even begin. And you know what? We'll let the hometown Yinzer even jump us, because the Steelers did smash this draft. And thank you so much for making it back in here.
That's absolutely true.
And that's going to start me with the first person here, Bob. Which is Najee. The Pittsburgh Steelers go out of their way, and they end up getting, for 2 years in a row, tackle help in a situation where they drastically need it. And they got a center that they needed. And you look here and say, all right, Pittsburgh Steelers, you just built yourself an offensive line. You went out and you got
they crushed it.
Competent quarterback in the offseason, Russell Wilson and Fields. Whichever one starts, it's going to be better than Kenny Pickett.
Yeah.
Does Najee, seeing now that there are 2 first-round tackles in front of him, a culmination of guard to centers that are all either first-round or second-round talents, does he go from what was before a 5th-round value higher on your board? And this extends to Warren as well.
So,
and thank you for kicking this off, Tasman. Love it.
So here's the thing. Tamsin is absolutely right on the regardless of the success or failure of these players, the Steelers went out there and addressed significant needs in the NFL draft. They went out there, grabbed their tackle, grabbed their center. Now, to your point, Joe, does this make it any better for any one particular running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers? And I would say, if I were to look at who it could benefit the most, it would probably be Najee Harris, for the reasons that you said, because he is a more downhill, through the tackles kind of rusher, as opposed to Jaylen Warren, who is more outside. Now, here's the thing. Although we believe the Steelers to have knocked it out of the park with this draft, just from a positional value standpoint, they went out and got everybody from a position of need that they wanted. They didn't reach on anybody in particular. As it regards to fantasy football here, I still think that for the Pittsburgh Steelers, that with all of the changes with offensive coordinator, with all of the changes at quarterback, and with these changes on the offensive line, that I don't feel like any one particular Pittsburgh Steelers player is skyrocketing up my draft board at all. Here's the deal, though. Come July, I think that the player that could benefit the most from this, if they decide that this is going to be the starter, would be Justin Fields. With Justin Fields being a tremendous rushing threat and beefing up an offensive line, I think we could potentially see some really good going back, whoever's starting at quarterback, I think we're going to see some pretty decent numbers through the air. Not great, but pretty decent. But when it comes to Justin Fields as a rushing quarterback with a beefier offensive line, I think that we could start to see Justin Fields potentially climbing up the board just a little bit. Climbing up the board.
See, Bob, the only way I agree with that is if the Steelers basically say they're going to run the Ravens offense.
Let me finish for a moment.
Because if you look at this team, the receiving core doesn't have really anyone worth desiring, right? Am I missing something here?
You're not missing anything, but I want to go to Tamsin's point here, because it's a point that I'm trying to make, is that avoiding the Steelers right now at this point in time in the offseason, if you are drafting, is probably a really good idea, because the situational components to what's going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last year, you saw a decently balanced split at certain points in times with the offensive players, but then it starts skewing in one direction or the other depending on what player you own. And so saying at the current ADP, so let's just look up Najee's current ADP, because I have not looked at that right now. Because like I said, he's not a person that's really on my draft board. So looking at Najee right now in terms of ADP, he's sitting on Fantasy Pros. He's sitting at a consensus in PPR overall as player 88, running back number 25. And I think that that's fair enough when we take a look at, all of the changing components, like we said earlier, that has been happening. Jaylen Warren here, ADP 93. So to Tamsin's point, and to the point that I was making earlier, is that I'm not, even though these players are individually talented, and although the unit together could work really well, I think at value that you're going to probably take a chance at value, but I wouldn't go up a round or two to get any Steelers player. Even a guy like George Pickens, just going in.
Oh, Pickens for sure. I agree with that.
Looking at Pickens's ADP, it's sitting at 65. So this is all within that range of your 5th through your 9th round. And I think it's fair enough that if you go out there and you want Najee Harris as a 3rd or 4th running back starter, that's fair enough. But what's probably going to happen, is more likely going to happen, is that if you're considering drafting Najee Harris and you're considering, I can get him in that 6, 7, 8 round range, maybe 5th round, depending on how my drafts, you're most likely not going to go in too hard at running back to start with.
Yeah.
Because we have seen Najee produce numbers in the past, although, it hasn't been great the last couple of seasons. We've seen better numbers. Jaylen Warren, again, we've seen the better numbers. And this goes back to kind of the Washington Commanders from last year, where not one of those running backs really stood out to anybody for any one particular reason. Brian Robinson, bruiser, downhill runner, but had some issues with health from some off-the-field stuff, versus Antonio Gibson. Then all of a sudden you see Chris Rodriguez come out of the woodwork at various points in time during the season. And most likely you drafted those two guys like I did, or like other people did, because you went wide receiver, or you went a combination of wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. The value in Najee Harris is in that as a 3rd running back. I don't think the value is super high if you decide to take him as a number 1 or number 2 running back.
I disagree. I think he's a fine number 2 now.
However, if you do, that means that you have probably constructed a pretty decent enough team on the periphery outside of running back that it's going to be really good. Now, Muth, on the other hand here, I think Muth's value really went up.
Yeah, absolutely.
In this draft, because while tight end is a difficult position to learn, when you have 2 quarterbacks that love tight ends, and now they're going to have more protection, considerably more protection, and the running back situation is pretty much the same as you got last year. It's good enough. I think that you're going to see a decent amount of production from Muth, and at his ADP right now, let's pull up his ADP.
Well, as you're pulling up, let me give you a little extra reason why his value goes up. For years, Muth has been one of the longest tight ends at having to chip or stay into block, because, quite frankly, the Steelers needed it. When you add now a second tackle, so you don't need to have the tight end chip, he gets in the routes quicker. And when your tight end gets into routes quicker, you get a lot more check down. Obviously, it's a bigger thing in PPR and half PPR. But again, the entire game is built around targets. And when you get into possession more, you're in a better spot.
He's coming off, again, the stat is coming from Fantasy Pros in terms of current ADPs and drafts. Overall PPR 143, tight end number 16.
That's a steal.
We're looking.
He's a top 12 now. Muth 100% is a top 12 now.
We're saying fantasy tight end rankings, and if I can go in and I can get I just want to make sure we're verifying this 2024.
Could he end up being the effect of 22 is what Tanzan asks.
Again.
I'll hit that in a second, Tanzan.
Going here, he is in that same vein as Cole Kmet, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz, Dallas Goedert, and Brock Bowers. And maybe you only have a discussion with yourself about Cole Kmet. But at the same point in time, that production that we saw from Cole Kmet last year, although it won't directly translate to Pat Freiermuth this year, there is a very realistic expectation that with quarterbacks that are outside of maybe Russell Wilson in a couple of games, that he's going to be a nice piece of the puzzle. And if I can get him as the 16th overall tight end, and I don't have to go and reach on a player like Evan Ingram, and I don't have to reach on a player like Ferguson or Kincaid, I am in, and even Trey McBride, I am in a really good situation if he comes and he just, produces every couple of weeks, because the tight end position, once you get to a certain point, if you get 8 to 9 points out of your tight end, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
If you don't have a world beater tight end, you might as well just wait. And Pat Freiermuth is the perfect, hey, I'm just going to wait and I'm going to pick up value at other positions.
So let me round this out here for you, Tanzan, because the reason you actually asked the very important question, your tight ends. If he's the number 2 receiver on your team, you're talking now elite. You're talking Kittle. You're talking why the hell am I Porta,
McBride.
You're talking even Frazier, as you just mentioned right there. So where I think your reality is that given the fact that this is still a Mike Tomlin-based offense or team, I don't see a scenario where Pat Freiermuth isn't the number 2 target. When you look at the history of George Pickens, he's not a volume guy. And then when you look at the remaining receiving core, I'll get to Roman Wilson in a minute, who they just drafted in the 3rd round. But when you look at the rest of their receivers, not a single one of them is quality and proven. You can make an argument Calvin Austin's a speedster, they get something out of them. You can make an argument that Van Jefferson was drafted high. So no, Van Jefferson's never done anything of quality. Pat Freiermuth will easily jump Jefferson in terms of targets. And George Pickens, even though he should be getting the ball more often, is living in his head that he's more open more often than he really is. So the reality is that Pickens is great for 6 highlights a year, but not your day-to-day fantasy value. So do I think Freiermuth has a good chance of being in that top 2, just as we're talking about a Ferguson or Laporta or a Kelsey? Yes, I think that of this tier, absolutely he is. The one thing I want to point out, and I'm putting this out very early because he's on nobody's board, I believe that for fantasy value, where you'll get him, Roman Wilson has the potential of being in dynasty leagues someone you should target as the 5th receiver. I think that realistically, you are talking about a guy who has the skill set as the possession receiver that this team does not have. It's the only real threat to Freiermuth, to get back to your last question, is the rookie. But we have to realize Tomlin doesn't rely on rookies early. He's not going to start coming around and playing until after Halloween. So he's a great candidate to stock and stash and then pair up with the player later, or to acquire from someone else's team. Pair him up with someone like an old man Thielen, who have a great beginning of the year. You can move, and then you can play Wilson in the second half. To that point, it probably means that when Wilson does turn on, though, it'll be at Freiermuth's detriment. But it's also possible that when he turns on, it'll be an additive to the offense. Because I think one thing is certainly clear, which goes back to your first question of, do you want any Steelers? The answer should be, on paper, hard no. They don't score enough points. But with your point here of Arthur Smith and the fact that he's a run-the-ball guy, even when he has, let's call it, generalized offense, but one superstar running back, they put up points. Now, granted, King Henry's a freak, but they put up points. So I think it's reasonable to assume the Steelers are going to be above 21 a game. Remember, league average is roughly 20.8. That's just saying they're an above average offense. And you're going from a team that was well below average. Picking up players from there is an opportunity to get value late. Their rookie is certainly going to be at the end. I recommend him as being a late round guy to stash, being Wilson, the third round pick of the Steelers, to get the first rookie to talk about today. And I do think that he is one of these guys that will be able to give you a playoff push because he is going to be a slot machine. He will end up with 80 catches. And I would say 50 of them at least are happening after Halloween.
I mean, that's pretty bold.
Playoff.
I've been listening to you, and
because there's no second receiver. The Steelers have no second receiver because Van Jefferson ain't it.
I understand that, and I'm definitely, it's definitely not falling on a deaf ear, but I would definitely caution.
I'm not saying build your team around the guy. I'm saying take him as a stash in the 17th round.
Yeah, and the thing with a couple of these players, and we're going to touch on a couple players that got drafted this draft, and also if you're just joining us, we want to also touch on some fantasy winners and losers from the draft who are already in the league. That's why we kind of started off with the Steelers. Joe and I's favorite team. Tim's a Steelers fan here as well. So when we look at a player like Najee and like Pat Freiermuth, there are some things to consider based upon the newness that has creeped in to the teams and to the world there. Now, a player that I think this needs to be touched on because it is going to be kind of a contentious point, I think, in fantasy circles, is the number one, the Blake Corum to the Los Angeles Rams. How does this affect Kyren Williams, if at all? And number two that I want to touch on is J.J. McCarthy to the Minnesota Vikings. Let's talk about J.J. McCarthy to the Minnesota Vikings first.
Minnesota first? Okay.
Before we touch on the Rams. Now, the reason to talk about J.J. McCarthy here is that we have two really important pieces for fantasy teams from last year on the Minnesota Vikings right now that are currently healthy. That's Jordan Addison and that's Justin Jefferson. And going into this season, we wanted to make sure that there was a quarterback in-house to take care of these two really good wide receivers, dare I say stud for maybe even both of them. Then we also had TJ Hawkinson coming back from an injury, potentially middle of the season this year. He's fallen down the draft boards almost in that vein of Pat
he should be. He's missing half the season.
Which is
but he's also a great stash.
And then they also have Aaron Jones, who we were talking about last week as potentially being somebody to stay away from because of an unknown situation. We also have Ty Chandler on the team, who came out a couple of times to perform decently well enough for everybody here. Now, I don't want to talk about J.J. McCarthy specifically, but I do want to talk about his effect on the fantasy value of these players. So now knowing that the Vikings have a somewhat capable quarterback situation in their midst. They have Darnold, who is what he is. We know what he is. He's just average to below average at best. We also know that J.J. McCarthy has been given rave reviews, climbed up draft boards. If you watched any Michigan game this year, he has the grit, he has the stamina to perform at an NFL level. Now, will he be the Kirk Cousins light of this next year where he could go to potentially 26, 30 touchdowns? No, I don't think that that's going to happen. However, is a season out of J.J. McCarthy this year behind, this offensive line, which is okay, with these weapons, is it possible that he reaches 22, 23 touchdowns? Absolutely. It's really possible that he does that. He also can move in the pocket. He also can run. So these are benefits that J.J. McCarthy has that, a couple other quarterbacks might not. He's coming into a situation where the weapons are already in place, unlike, let's say, Jaden Daniels, where the weapons are there, but they're like older and maybe suspect a little bit. So this situation that we have here is actually really good. So you ask yourself, okay, Fantasy Pros has them as the 26th ADP quarterback, right above Daniel Jones, Bryce Young, Russell Wilson, Drake May, and Justin Fields. And above Bo Nix, obviously. But where this comes in at is these Minnesota skill position players, where we might have dinged Justin Jefferson prior to getting J.J. McCarthy. He's now sitting at wide receiver 4. And, you know, when we talk about what's going on in the draft this year, you're probably going to see CD, Tyreek, Jamar Chase all go ahead of Justin Jefferson this year. And at 4, it's actually really, really nice. Now, with the injury from last year, we hope he comes back and lays it out. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that Justin Jefferson, with J.J. McCarthy and a combination of Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy, where he gets to 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, if not 11 touchdowns. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But now that I don't have to take him at 1 or 2 overall, there is value at 4. And there is value at worst at 5. So if you take his overall ADP, and again, this ADP is coming from Fantasy Pros, he's at ADP 5. So you have Christian McCaffrey, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, all going. And then you have potentially Breece Hall, and we'll touch on Breece Hall this episode because I think he needs to be talked about a little bit.
He does.
But at number 5, you have decisions of Breece Hall, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, and Bijan Robinson, and Justin Jefferson with more solidity at quarterback. I kind of want to take him at 5 because coming back on the comeback here, Joe, you have another opportunity to take a fairly solid wide receiver. And if you don't, so that's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. You're sitting here at what, like pick 19, somewhere around there? You want to walk out of that situation. You say, okay, well, Kyron Williams might be there. DJ Moore might be there. Michael Pittman, Josh Allen. There is a little bit more uncertainty at that wide receiver position going back down at the back end of the second, early third round. That taking Justin Jefferson now feels actually kind of good. Now, I said kind of good.
I want to hit on you here, Bob. All right, so
hold on. In a minute. Right. Then going to Jordan Addison. Now, Jordan Addison actually feels much better. He's going off the board at wide receiver 40 in current ADP. Overall, number 85. He's in that same conversation as Tony Pollard, a guy we want to stay away from. Javonte Williams, another guy we want to stay away from. Tua, I think that's an overvalue for Tua right there. DeAndre Hopkins, where it's good enough value for him. Njoku, Odunze, Chubb, and Warren. I would rather have, at this moment, walking into that season out of that group of players with the current,
Addison, there's no fight about that.
Jordan Addison. Now, that his value is probably going. The more we see J.J. McCarthy work out and the work in the offseason, that value of Jordan Addison is probably going to be the one player out of Minnesota that's probably going to fluctuate the most. Because we know Hawkinson's injured, so we know that his value is probably going to be down in the basement for a long time unless we see that the injury isn't going to bother him and he's not going to be out to midseason. Now, for Aaron Jones, before you touch on your point, Aaron Jones is coming off the board at running back 18. Now, he's in that same running back category as James Conner, who also got a rookie running back behind him, or Ramondre Stevenson, whose situation really hasn't changed, even with Drake May. And David Montgomery, whose situation we think might get worse this year and might stay the same. It is what it is. And then DeAndre Swift. We don't know what that Chicago situation is going to be like. It could be feast. It could be a lot of feasting, but maybe not DeAndre Swift's time to eat. Now, you go and you say, okay, well, how does this improve Aaron Jones? It really doesn't. I mean, Aaron Jones is good, and I think that he is going to
I disagree with that completely. I think it drastically helps Aaron Jones.
I think, but here's the thing, Joe. He's not going to climb up the board with the.
No, he's not, but his value is climbing up.
The value is the value. If I'm sitting there and I'm sitting there in this 60 through 70 overall. Now, again, this ADP is overall, and that's not how the draft is actually going to go. But if he does happen to be the 18th running back off the board,
you got to steal.
That's after Kenneth Walker. That's after Alvin Kamara. And I'm going to be honest with you. I would rather have Aaron Jones and not Walker and not Kamara based upon what I saw last year and based upon how their situation really hasn't gotten any better. The situation for both of those players hasn't gotten any better. And Stevenson's situation is what it is. So out of those guys, if I'm going into the draft, JJ McCarthy has helped Aaron Jones, but his value it's not skyrocketing in the same vein that Jordan Addison might, depending on what JJ McCarthy produces in this offseason workouts and stuff.
Yeah, so let's go through them. And well, I'll hit on Jones because it's the one you were talking about right there, is that I think the big part is Jones never got valued correctly. He's been too far undervalued from the starting point. He should be about running back 12, if not higher. And that has nothing to do with McCarthy or Darnold. Just he's undervalued right now and has been since the start.
He really has been a lot. Mm-hmm.
But as we go into this, Addison, I completely agree with you. Jeff, and this could be recency bias. This could be a lot of things here. First off, Minnesota's not starting McCarthy off the jump. And they're not going to start McCarthy off the jump. And again, I'm starting with, for those who watched last episode, McCarthy was my number one running back in this class. Penix was second. It was mostly based upon where they were going to end up. McCarthy hit the lottery. He's the best landing spot of all of them. Maybe Penix could get some time off. But when you look at this and say, there's no better spot you could have been at than Minnesota. And again, I'm going to give myself kudos by calling that's where McCarthy was going to go. Although I really do think New England should have taken him. The problem you have is that they are not going to start him over Darnold right away. And Darnold is potentially still going to lead the league in interceptions by only playing in September. That's who Sam Darnold is. So when I look at this and say, do I want Jeff, who, let's be frank, didn't come back and play last year because he wasn't getting the situation he wanted until he got paid, which is the definition of quitting on a team. Do I want to see what he's like with a developmental quarterback when the team doesn't have a chance at the playoffs? And that is not a risk I want at number 5, period. It's not a risk I want in my first round pick at all. And I just don't. Am I fighting his talent? No. Am I trying to say that he's not capable of putting up 20 touchdowns? He absolutely is. Mm-hmm. But I also know that the way the Vikings are going to have to win in September, and again, starting with September, if they are going to stay competitive before knowing what the schedule is, it is going to have to be through running the ball with Aaron Jones. Ty Chandler effectively is Madison all over again, so you don't got to worry about anyone running up your rear there. But what I do want to make apparent is that I don't trust Jeff's heart. I have no fear of Chase's heart. I have no fear of CeeDee Lamb. I have no fear of McCaffrey. So we're talking 4th, 5th pick overall. Jeff for me is demoted to a second-round luxury second receiver. Like if he would have gotten,
I disagree with that.
A real dude. I'm looking at his results. He could have come back 3 weeks earlier than he did. He didn't.
That's fine, but
I'm not saying he's not talented. But wherever you're putting Devontae Adams, Jeff's right next to him because they're two incredibly talented receivers in positions where they are not going to be utilized well enough. For mostly because Sam Darnold's going to throw too many interceptions. Now, there's not going to be enough offensive snaps from Minnesota.
Okay.
I know Devontae Adams will show up on a team that has no chance of making the playoffs. Joe. I don't think Jeff will.
Here's the thing about Justin Jefferson, okay? And it's weird, and for everybody watching right now, we're breaking down some values of some players that we think are.
Let me clarify this, Bob. I love you. This is mostly a hate on Sam Darnold more than anything else.
No, that's fair, Joe. But here's the thing. Here's the thing to consider: that in his best year, because he's played for 2 years, we saw 1,800 yards and on 8 touchdowns on 128 receptions with Kirk Cousins. Sam Darnold, the last time that Sam Darnold played a full season, that was not shortened, I believe, by injury or by trade. I'm just double checking Sam Darnold right now. Okay. Yeah,
It's been a hot minute.
The guy is not a world beater. That is,
No.
everybody knows that. When we go to his stats, he's never played basically a full season. He played.
He's not going to play a full season this year either.
Okay, but I'm just working it out. So I'm not going to take 2019 as a sample size. That was his best year, but it was his second year. So we're going to go in here to 2022. He played
2 years ago.
He played 6 games played. I don't want to go to the San Francisco because the San Francisco situation was weird. And it wasn't like he was in 10 games, but that was like blowout numbers and just coming out. So 6 games in 2022, completed 82 passes for 1,143 yards, 7 touchdowns. And back in 2021, he completed 243 passes for 2,527 yards, 9 touchdowns. Now, just cross-referencing this, I want to look up 2021 Panthers wide receivers. So give me 1 second here. So Panthers wide receivers and their receiving yards in 2021. Again, this is just an experiment.
Only one more looking at is DJ Moore
to talk about these players. So DJ Moore, in the year that Sam Darnold was pretty good or pretty average for the Carolina Panthers, DJ Moore cracked 1,157 yards. And he also had 4 receiving touchdowns, which last year Justin Jefferson had 5 receiving touchdowns.
Yeah, 4 receiving touchdowns out of J-Jeff is not a win for a first-round pick.
But, Joe, here's the thing. It's where I'm looking at is this yardage and reception total in PPR.
I'll be with you here in a minute for the memes.
In his best year, Joe, which was 2022, which was that rookie season, he only caught 8 touchdowns. So when he skyrocketed up that board, it's because of the receptions, it's because of the yards. I think that with a return to maybe 6, 7, 8 touchdowns, hopefully 10, like I said, and 1,200 to 1,400 yards, he's not out of the conversation as being a first-round wide receiver. The way you're talking about him takes him all the way down to the second round.
Because I don't want him.
That's not going to happen.
I don't want him.
I get that you don't want him, but the stats are going to be there, I think, regardless of the quarterback situation, because he is going to be a threat. But the better value, yes, is
Sam Darnold's throwing interceptions all around him. All right, so end of the second round. All right, dude, you got choices all over.
Penix is gone. Need wide receiver preferably. Penix still here though, and is.
All right, so I'm assuming you're doing your draft live. Is that correct here, memes?
Yeah,
You know where I would tell you to go if he's still on the board. Don't know if he is, but if you're looking at receivers for a dynasty right now, I mentioned it before. Roman Wilson is a guy that I would want to saddle up for a dynasty league. The Steelers are in such a need of receivers. They don't have a volume guy at all. He's the only volume receiver on their entire roster. Sure, their quarterback situation is in hell, but he is setting himself up to be a slot machine, hunter catch guy. That is Roman Wilson with the Steelers if he's still on your board. And you need to go receiver. That's who I would recommend as a starting point. There's a good chance at 210 he is still on the board. Unless you have a Steelers homer.
I think that Roman
Wilson right there in front of my face. Yeah, he's the second pick. You should go with him.
Yeah, I think that if I were looking in this draft and coming down and seeing what's going on, I think that Marshawn Lloyd at the running back position is in a good spot in Green Bay because we know, yes, Josh Jacobs got signed to a contract and Dylan is still there. But Lloyd is a good player and he should make some room and should make some space on there. If it was a wide receiver, I definitely would go Wilson. Troy Franklin's in a bad situation, and so is Polk. until we know a little bit more about May, until we know about Bo Nix and what the ability for the Denver Broncos and what the ability for the New England Patriots are going to be to move the ball, I think you can't realistically set your expectations very high for those players. I see maybe like 300 yards, 400 yards in these rookie wide receiver seasons. I don't see it as being a benefit to you. So I do agree with Joe that would be pretty good to go with. Yeah, I mean,
I go Roman Wilson. I get you hate the Steelers, but you got to love someone who's a slot machine. And the Steelers don't have a pass catcher of volume on their roster. And sure, you can make the certain argument that next year the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers is not on their roster right now. That's totally possible and a fair thing to say. But he literally is taking Deontay Johnson's spot. And the thing with Johnson that really got him out of town here was he didn't fight for extra yardage. Roman Wilson will not give you that problem. You don't come out of a Harbaugh system and not love contact. So the way I look at this, and again, this is not for a rookie year projection. This is for a dynasty answer. Look at what you got out of Deontay Johnson and then add 3 yards per contact because he won't run out of bounds. And also, that's why I think Roman, you do that to Deontay Johnson's numbers, you're looking at a 1,300-yard receiver week in, week out, and going to get 6 touchdowns. That absolutely is worth second round, 10th pick.
Yeah,
that's
and
a steal.
Here's the thing about Corley is that Corley is he's a very good player, right? But the coming from Western Kentucky, there is concerns that you could bring up about competition. There is concerns that his abilities and his skill set, while it might be better for certain scenarios, it might not be the best for the Jets situation. But the Jets took him in the third round. And I think right now, when it comes to dynasty, when you're looking at Corley memes, that the situation is a little bit different for the Steelers as opposed to as it is for the Jets. But
yeah, here, let me ask you this another way. Let me set you up for this, Bob. What is Corley's path to being the number one receiver on his team? How long is that going to take to get there?
He can't get past Garrett Wilson. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's impossible.
He won't get past Garrett Wilson, but I don't.
You can make an argument Roman Wilson will be the number one Steelers receiver by October.
I don't think he's designed to get past Garrett Wilson. I think he's designed to complement Garrett Wilson. Now, right now, Mike Williams is there. So if I'm looking at this from a long-term perspective, Corley definitely has the skill sets to do that, but there's a drive, momentum kind of thing that you have to look at with Corley. There's also playing at the level of competition that you are working at. I mean, Wilson played at the very best against the very best.
National title, baby.
And when it comes to quarterbacks at that level, you might have some questions because, the offensive lines are always good. So what do they do under pressure? But when it comes to the wide receivers, I'm not knocking low school wide receivers because there's been plenty of talented wide receivers from schools that aren't at that level, but they've been elite kind of talents that transcend that school. And there's been plenty from Jerry Rice onward. But you come and you say, okay, Corley, 210. It's not a bad pick. It's not a bad pick. That's the thing, Joe. In a Superflex Dynasty League, Corley is not a bad pick.
But Roman could be a home run.
However,
Corley's he's an okay single.
Roman could develop into a favorite target. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the type of quarterback, although he does target lots of wide receivers in games. I don't think he is one of those players that really likes to throw immediately at wide receivers that are younger. I think he likes to build rapport, and he doesn't get that right out of the gate. Then he doesn't really throw you the ball. So there's a lot of question marks there. And then the other question is, how long is Aaron Rodgers going to be there? Injury last year, but also, Hall of Famer getting up there in age. How long is he going to be there? At least I could see one of Justin Fields or Russell Wilson being on the team in a couple of years. I don't know if Aaron Rodgers will be there. And if he's not, the way that the Jets
the propensity of Jets quarterbacks, they don't win on them very often.
It could play into Corley's ability in the future. Mind you, I don't think he's a bad pick by any stretch of the imagination. I think you're getting good. I think you're getting better value with Roman at that draft pick, but either one will work. So if you're a Jets fan, take the Jets player and hope for the future, hope for the best. But I think that Roman will probably give you a little bit of a more win now situation. Just building off of what Joe said, is that the situation, we don't have another wide receiver on the roster.
And George Pickens is overrated. I mean, there's no other way around that.
You're welcome, Memes. Hopes it
no
works.
No problem, Memes. Let's hope we can make some great ones.
Keep us posted.
Yeah, join us back, man. We'll hook you up with all your dynasty needs. We love talking dynasty.
And so Joe, here is the other. Are
we going back to Minnesota, or are we still talking Corley?
Let's not go back to Minnesota right now.
Okay.
I said I wanted to bring up one group of players, but as I'm looking on this ADP, actually, I want to bring up a different set of players.
Okay, where are we going?
But specifically one player in Rishi Rice.
Okay? Rishi! Love that guy.
Now, if you've watched the show for any part of the season last year, you know that Joe and I are big Rishi Rice fans. He skyrocketed up the boards. He was a great pickup if you picked him up in free agency. If you drafted him, he probably won you a couple of weeks, if not your fantasy league championship, just because of the value that you got him at. Now we're sitting at Rishi Rice, wide receiver 26. We actually had him pretty much as high as wide receiver 15, 16 before the whole before his legal trouble. Right now, he's expected to get a multi-game suspension, which will, I don't know how much the multi-game suspensions really affect third, fourth, fifth round guys in our mindset. I mean, if I were to go out there and get 2 solid wide receivers already and then come back in the 4 and the 5 and Rishi Rice is still there, I might consider it. Let's table Rishi Rice for a second to get back to Tim's in here. I'm thinking of offering a 102 Musgrave for a 108 Muth and a 2025. Would that be a good offer or no? I'd stick.
Oh, in a dynasty league, if you can get Harrison,
I'd stick tight.
Don't get rid of him. Muth's nice and all. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a Hall of Famer.
Stay at 102 with Luke, and if you wanted to, try to see if you can flip Luke and something else for Muth to do that, because I think the value of Luke Musgrave this year and Muth going into the draft is pretty much the same in terms of the overall consensus value of these two players, even though Joe and I both value and you value Muth higher.
Muth higher, yeah.
I don't think the dip from the Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams down to, that 8th overall where we're talking potentially Brian Thomas, who's also a very good player. If you watched last week, we were talking about Brian Thomas. Tim's, and Joe and I touched on this last week. Joe is very, very big on Marvin Harrison Jr. He has all the elite skill sets to do that. Is that going to turn itself together in Arizona? If Kyler Murray can come back and be the Kyler Murray that we think that he could be, it could happen. But as it is, other people in your league will value Harrison higher, even if you don't.
Yeah, the point is you should get a better haul back from Marvin Harrison Jr. than just 1-8.
You should get something better back. And whether that's you give the 102 and you get back a 106 or a 107 plus.
And next year's one. Well, if you told me you gave up 102 in Musgrave for Muth, his first this year and the first next year, okay, I can get that. I can get behind that trade. But see, I get you're not on a Harrison's bus. And quite frankly, he's in the worst landing spot. I hate the fact he's with Kyler Murray. Mm-hmm. But when you're trading someone of this elite proportion, or if someone's stupid enough to take Kyler Williams with the first pick instead of the kid from LSU, which should be the first pick overall, you then even have even more power because it should go the quarterback from LSU should be the first pick in dynasty leagues, without a doubt. He should. It's not even close. He's a running quarterback.
Caleb will be, but I think that
and it's a mistake.
Very good selection there. But
Caleb Williams should not be the first. The point being, if both of them are on the board, you should be able to get this year's first and next year's first out of whoever you're trading for and the player upgrade. So I that would be my answer. So,
and here's the other thing, Tamsin, that you can definitely wait until.
Oh, that's a tough question. Do it now or wait till you're on the clock.
You can definitely
I would
do that.
prearrange a trade with someone.
Joe.
Because I personally love prearranging.
Listen, just as we touched on a couple weeks back, Tamsin, and before the NFL draft happened, because we didn't know where all these players were going. If you are going to trade back, what is your intention? Who are you going to get? Who do you want more than what you have now? Because, like we said, there are players across the league that Joe and I absolutely hate. And if worse comes to worse, there are situations where we wouldn't draft certain guys, but then there are situations that if we are put into it, it doesn't matter how much we dislike the player, we take them, because it's kind of like going into an actual NFL draft.
Kind of like being on the turn having J-Jeff there. I don't want him, but I'm going to take him.
And being the person that, the wide receiver situation, or like that thing that happened with Minnesota and the Eagles a couple of years ago where the Eagles took somebody really bad and then, Minnesota takes Justin Jefferson. So I would say before you evaluate if you want to do that trade or not, who would you want to take at 108? And as we look at it right now, is potentially Marvin Harrison. Yeah, it's a head over heart situation, and it's fine. I mean, we all get into this.
He could get potentially the receiver that you're bringing up right now, Bob. He could get Worthy at 8. If you get Worthy at 8, I completely justify this.
Yeah, you could get Worthy at 8 and then get a couple of picks in next year's draft and even a couple more in this year's draft if you feel like you
upgrade to Muth and get Worthy. I think that's worth Harrison. And knowing you have a second first round next year? Yeah.
And here's the other thing to consider, Tamsin, and for everybody who does play Dynasty, here's the other thing to consider is that, number one, when we talked about how long do you want to play, how long are you in this league for, how long do you want to play? The second is there's that extra piece that's not in redraft leagues, but going into next year, if you're trading if you're trading first round picks, who are you wanting next year? What are you trying to leverage for next year's situation? And what is that player list? What does that player list look like going into next year's draft? So trading out of a prime spot like 102 and then getting player personnel this year that could help you, and always finding a willing trading partner is good. So definitely shop that around before the draft. And I think that it would be fair enough to say, make a clock decision and say, hey, you still want that? Okay. Marvin Harrison's
or get a couple people bidding off each other. Because like I said, both the Washington quarterback and Marvin Harrison Jr. are worth a haul.
Yeah. And this is the year too, that we've had a plethora of young wide receivers come into the league. And in redraft leagues, let me just pull up the redraft league situation here. I clicked on Rishi Rice. If you're looking at redraft leagues, Marvin Harrison is all the way up at his ADP has skyrocketed. He is going. It's going right now as the 9th rated wide receiver.
That's too high.
Pros ADP.
For a redraft league, that's too high.
I'm just saying this is in a PPR.
You're saying at the first turn, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going. That is crazy stupid.
I agree. Okay.
Dynasty league, absolutely. Redraft, hell no.
But again, these ADP values are consensus values from lots of different locations. So this could be, the situation.
No, I get it. This is why we're going to be doing our money where our mouth is Moneyball leagues.
Why I say that, Tamsin, about and for everybody who's listening about Marvin Harrison Jr. is that if we're even considering him that high in a redraft league, not taking him in Dynasty, just because my heart's not in the right place, or not that my heart's not in the right place, that my heart's not with that one player, I can always trade him, right? I can always trade him, and people have him at a really high value. And this is the year among any other years that if you need a wide receiver, you are in a perfect situation. So
yeah, but I like that answer. Upgrading to Muth and getting Worthy and a first next year. I'm taking
I
that.
think you could get more. That's what I'm saying. I think you could get more.
Oh, you mean better than Muth?
Well, not better than Muth, but I think you could get more draft capital. I really
Well,
do
then just
think
this year's
you could
first
get
and
more
next
draft
year's
capital.
first.
Yeah, I think you could get more draft capital. So talk through the trade, and I think you could get more. But back to Rishi Rice here.
Back to the Rishi.
Rishi Rice. Thanks, Tamsin. So Rishi Rice suspension upcoming, and prior to that, we had him as high as wide receiver 15. We had him as potentially being a third round wide receiver, third round grade. Now, with that suspension, and we know how Patrick Mahomes developed with him last year. We know that.
Yeah, and that's real because he literally threw Toomey and Sky Moore out of the bus. He might as well not be on the roster right now.
And when you say out of the bus, it was out of the bus. There was no chance they were ever coming back in the bus. Now, Marquise Brown is there, okay? He is going to be a threat to whatever Kansas City numbers happen. Now,
yes,
Marquise Brown is going off at he's overall ranked 36. ADP is somewhere in that 33 range. You go down to Xavier Worthy, he's sitting at an ADP of 43. So the question here that I have to ask myself, Joe, when it comes to Xavier Worthy in Dynasty, yeah, by all means take him, because I think that anybody with Patrick Mahomes, despite what we said about Sky Moore is not the type of player Xavier Worthy is. Sky Moore is not the type of player Rishi Rice is. Kadarius Toney is not the type of player that those players.
No, none of them are. He's a speed cannon.
When it comes down to Kansas City here, we have, Kadarius Toney still popping off at a weird ADP. I don't really like that ADP. That's
Tony's there, but it hasn't been adjusted for the post draft. So, to answer your question here, Bob.
But again, I bring it up because Xavier Worthy at his value, I just want to at his current value, Joe. Xavier Worthy is around that same wide receiver value position that we talked on last week, where we have Keon Coleman, Dobbs, Jacoby Myers, Downs, Jameson Williams, Mike Williams, Christian Watson, who we're staying away from, Tyler Lockett, who we're staying away from. Ladd McConkey went to the Chargers, and Cortland Sutton. A lot of guys there to stay away from, but there's a lot of guys there that there is some upward momentum, and these are just above Brian Thompson. This is your rookie wide receiver range. This is your 5th, 6th round, where some of these rookies could pop off the board depending upon 5th, 6th, 7th round. Some of them are in better situations than others, and Xavier Worthy seems to be at least in a good situation until Rishi Rice comes back. So is he worth it? Is Rishi Rice worth a pick early, first of all? Is Rishi Rice worthy of a pick in the 4th round, depending on probably a 3-4 game suspension here? And if so, if he is suspended, is Xavier Worthy worth the pick? Or do I flex myself and pivot towards Hollywood Brown?
All right, so broad picture Kansas City's receivers. Let's hit them all up here in order. I don't think Hollywood Brown actually is going to deter from anyone. I think Hollywood Brown is going to be the catalyst that's going to take them back to Mahomes is scoring 28 a game. I think that he's certainly going to get his, but I believe virtually all of his will be additive over last year, and he's not going to do it at a detriment of another player. So I want to say I firmly believe Hollywood should be the first one off the board over Rishi because he's going to be there. Now, here's the problem you have with Worthy. This is an offense that takes a while to develop. Even with Rishi Rice, he wasn't coming out of the cannon in week 1 and week 2. Part of it is they were experimenting with Sky Moore. Now, the other part, and this is the counter argument to what I just said in the historical wisdom, is that Rishi Rice is playing a historical wide receiver position. He's doing his ins, his outs, his slot screens, etc. Worthy's going to play Tyreek Hill football. Go deep, run far, find a hole, Mahomes will find you. So I do believe that there is great potential in Worthy. I would draft him before Rice. I would have him as the second Kansas City receiver off the board for PPR leagues.
And you're saying this because of the suspension?
I'm saying this because of the suspension, where we're at right now. Yes. I would take Hollywood before them. Or when we look at the future, I am looking at, well, Worthy is the value on the Dynasty League. I think that he could be a Dynasty great one. When we look at this year with Rishi's going to be in a spot where it's, did he lose his job? Because that's basically what this question is. Will Rishi Rice be relegated to the 4th target in Kansas City in November? That's basically the question.
He won't.
And he won't. Unless he drops the ball early and Hollywood never does. Because
so
Kelsey's going to be in the top 2.
What I'm hearing from you,
Worthy is probably, and this is my guess for Worthy, you're going to see a lot of stat lines that look something like this. 5 targets, 3 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown. He is going to be
bold.
the Sports Center machine. That's what Tyreek was young. That's what Worthy will be. And then the volume guys around him, if you think back to those rosters, was Kelsey and one other receiver. Rice certainly is capable of being that, but he's in a downfield spot. I love Rishi Rice if you already have him on your team as a dynasty. For the price right now that Worthy is there, he's not the biggest loser in this draft, but he's not far from it. And the other two, in Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, I would not be surprised if one of the two of them do not start week 1 with Kansas City. Maybe even both of them are not there. So that's how I look at this overall. I really think Sky Moore has a likelihood of being a Bronco, and that's how this is going to end
So
up.
I got a question for you then.
Maybe even a Cowboy.
So it seems to me like what you're saying, and probably what a lot of people here would maybe agree with here, is that a couple weeks ago we were talking about, quarterbacks like they were, not worth it at some value. But it seems to me that with the addition of Worthy and with Hollywood Brown and the general really goodness of Kansas City, that it's not as scary anymore to take Patrick Mahomes. And
I think Patrick Mahomes going to be the number 1 receiver this year, number 1 quarterback this year.
And if you do take him, that taking him in the 4th round, 3rd round, even ahead of a couple of these dual threat quarterbacks potentially, that could be pretty good. So talk to us a little bit about where you see Patrick Mahomes falling this draft. Right now, he is
quarterback
projected.
5?
Hold on, I'm just in the quarterback rankings. He's actually quarterback 3 according to Fantasy Pros here.
And he should be behind Stroud and Hurts, so he should be 4.
He's behind Allen and Hurts. That's who he's behind.
He should be behind Stroud as well.
Stroud, actually, he's ahead of Lamar Jackson, ahead of CJ Stroud. So
that's not giving Stroud enough love.
Again, he's going off at quarterback 4.
Love it. Take him all day at quarterback 4.
ADP anywhere as high as 18 and as low as 48, but stabilizing in that 30 range. Patrick Mahomes is at that
4th round. I like him a hell of a lot more in the 5th round. No doubt about that. But
I'm going to name a couple of players, Joe, and you tell me Patrick Mahomes or that player, okay?
And this is just, 3rd, 4th round, assuming I have a relatively balanced.
I will go from player on Fantasy Pros list at 30 to player on Fantasy Pros list at 40.
And again, this is adjusted for knowing we have Worthy. Okay.
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes or no, knowing that Worthy is there, knowing that Rishi Rice will come back at some year, knowing that Travis Kelce is still there, knowing that Pacheco.
But also knowing Mahomes never comes off the field. I mean, that part
knowing
can't
that
be
Mahomes
removed.
never comes off the field.
Stroud did come off the field.
Lamar Jackson.
Mahomes.
Sam Laporta.
Mahomes.
Jalen Waddle.
Mahomes.
Josh Jacobs.
Ooh, I love running backs. Jacobs.
Rashad White.
Mahomes.
Stephon Diggs.
Mahomes.
Derrick Henry.
Ooh, that one's hard. Henry,
DK Metcalf,
Mahomes,
Pacheco,
Mahomes for sure.
Devonta Smith.
Mahomes.
So we have
basically over all the receivers.
You
I just found that out about myself.
And then coming off this list later, Joe, and this is just the list here.
Hey, Bob, you just did actually. Can I tell you the one thing that was really surprising about myself in that was how quick I was able to say Mahomes over Laporta. That was the part that was, and this is partially because of how much we've done the exercise. You can get so many tight ends late. I don't think that you're going to be able to get a value of Mahomes. No, obviously it's going to sound like a stupid sentence when we say it aloud, but you're going to be able to get anywhere near the return of Mahomes. I do think he has the quarterback one in him again. I think he has a 50 touchdown year.
This is the issue. So I could see Patrick Mahomes going anywhere upwards of the third round, high third round, low third round, high fourth round as well.
Well, see, I'm talking fourth round right now.
But here, no, I have a question for you, and this is a question that we've talked about, that we've debated a long time, and anybody who's listening can chime in as well, either on X or over on YouTube.
And while you're thinking, for those of you on X, you have to tell us in the broadcast page. If you just tweet it at us, we cannot respond live.
All right.
Sorry for cutting you off, Bob.
No, it's fine. All right, so I'm pulling up the serpentine draft order basically here, because I just kind of I want to get it right. Okay.
Sure.
So if I am drafting here at pick number, let me go here. Okay. If I'm drafting at pick number 6 overall, okay? I'm at 6 overall in a 12-team league. That means I get pick 6, pick 19,
26, 46,
pick 30, and pick 43.
And 12.
If I don't take, say Josh Allen is there, say Lamar Jackson is there, say Mahomes is there, say I don't take one of those guys, how long after those guys are taken does CJ Stroud go? And followed that, if you don't take them there, would you consider a Joe Burrow, Anthony Richardson, quarterback with a couple of question marks, although with an elite skill set in different ways? If you don't take a quarterback in the third round and you're sitting at pick 6, do you think one of them or somebody else lasts until the 4th, or are you just done and waiting until much later?
So the only 2 quarterbacks I would consider taking early, by early I mean before the 6th round, again with their price adjusted, like anyone would take Allen if he falls, obviously, but I'm saying given their expected price is Stroud and Mahomes. I think Lamar is going to be a league killer for you. We have seen the peak of Lamar. For last year, for crying out loud, Russell Wilson threw more touchdowns than Lamar Jackson. That's a fact. So I know he won the MVP. It was sexy. He basically won it because his defense beat San Francisco. That's why he won the MVP. Josh Allen should have been the MVP last year, period. So when you look at this and say, hey, do I want Lamar Jackson? Absolutely not. I want Stroud before him. Do I want to have Anthony Richardson? Hell no. Do I want to have any of the passing quarterbacks? Well, once we're sitting to passing quarterbacks, I might as well sit around and wait for either Dak or Tua. And now we're talking 9th round, and I can stack my team up really successfully by then. So the only 2 I would take before the 5th round are Mahomes and Stroud. End of discussion. And then afterwards, we're talking 9th round on, which is Tua, Lawrence, that neighborhood, even a Cousins. So again, the return for the top 2, huge, top 3. But once you get past that neighborhood, again, knowing I don't want Lamar, I don't want to chase an Anthony Richardson, seeing that everyone else got a shiny running quarterback object.
So the idea this year is to not chase, because there's definitely value to certain quarterbacks in the later rounds. But I want
and there's no doubt Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson are going to be chases this year to try to look like you're keeping up with your friends.
So here's the thing.
The equivalent of going back to what you said, is he a starter? That's the equivalent of drafting one of those two.
So Josh Allen is going as high in 10-team leagues as pick 20.
I get it.
He has an overall grade as potentially the 18th player off the board, with CJ Stroud potentially being a low 40s, high 30s, and then Mahomes following suit. So
now, here's why I get Mahomes going as high as 20 in a 10-man league, is because it's the turn. And you don't get another pick for another 20 picks. So if you want the quarterback, you have to do it there.
And that's why I bring this up, because
that's a draft strategy thing more than
usually,
a value.
Joe, when we see more than say we see Allen go off the board in the second round, and I ask this because this is important, and I want to share my opinion about it.
On the second turn there.
But
okay, yeah.
When you could put up quarterbacks on the screen there, and anybody who's watching can chime in as well. When you start to see a couple quarterbacks go off the board or some big name players go off the board, how much does a run affect how you value certain players? So, for example, the reason I'm saying this, Allen might go off in the second round, and there might be a person out there who gets scared, pulls the trigger on Lamar next. Then all of a sudden, early third round comes about, and you already have two guys at the back half who have a quarterback, and everybody else. It's especially dangerous when that run happens at the back half of a round, because now, say you're in the middle, and you don't want to take the last one in the run, of course. But if the last one in the run is actually really, really good, say CJ Stroud is in that run, there might be a little bit of value there. But how much does a run affect some of these quarterbacks? Because if Josh Allen goes at pick 20, it is, although Jalen Hurts' rankings are not as high here. I love the run. Starting the run is the best.
Absolutely.
Down there. But Jalen Hurts is going off the board as quarterback 2. He could go as high as 26, as low as 36, depending on league. And I want to ask you here, as I look through at the back half of this second round, early part of this third round, as I look through some of the players here, I know I shouldn't take a quarterback, but if the quarterback run starts and I miss out and I'm left with the decision with, do I have the run of Patrick Mahomes, or do I play quarterback carousel with a couple of rookies and a later quarterback, I'm okay with that. But would I rather, this got me in trouble last year with Patrick Mahomes again. But looking at these players, I see, again, Waddle, Laporta, Lamar, Nico, Etienne, Debo, Kelsey, Evans, Drake London, DJ Moore, Kyron Williams, Michael Pittman, Ayuk. And as I say all of those names, there's only 3 that maybe pop off the board at you and saying, I need that over a quarterback. So is it fair to say that a run is going to happen early because these players maybe are too high up the board, but there's going to be a couple value picks down at the back half of the end of the third round. So if you're sitting at pick 9 or 10 in the third round, you could potentially be getting Travis Etienne. I doubt it, but you could potentially be getting Travis Etienne, as Sam Laporta, Jalen Waddle. This quarterback run could make or break someone's third, fourth round here.
Oh, well.
So the question I guess I'm asking is, when do you think that run is going to happen? What players do you think are included in that quarterback run? And is it justifiable that run would happen in that round that you think? And anybody can chime in about the Tams, and if you want to share your thoughts as well, as Joe's talking here.
So here's the reality is that who do I think is going to be in that run? Lamar Jackson, because it's going to be from the same guy who asked later in the draft, is that guy still a starter? it's going to be from someone who's going off of name value. And Lamar Jackson certainly is not the one that you want. So you actually asked like two different questions inside of your question.
I asked a lot.
You did. So to break this down correctly, it comes down to knowing your guys. I have already, like I said, I'm very clear. The two quarterbacks I would take early, regardless of whether it's a run or not, are Stroud and Mahomes, in the order of Mahomes and then Stroud. I said it backwards. But those are the two I would take. So I don't even care if it's the fifth guy. If someone didn't take Stroud and messed up and took Lamar first, that's on you for taking a bad pick earlier than me. That ain't a me problem. So that's how I look at that. So, but when you look in that tier thereafter, what I think you're really going to find is that just like last year, and to a degree 2 years ago, the analytical field, which is where you're getting most of these consensus from this early in the draft, overvalue receivers. It's a fact. It's part of being in the analytics. And what we're going to see as we get closer to draft time is those running backs come back up.
Yeah.
If it's what's going to happen.
But
so
here's the running.
So my answer is, if I got the right guy, which is Mahomes or Stroud, I don't care if I'm in a run. That's who I want.
Okay. So based off of that, my second question is, where's that run happening? Because like I said, usually
runs happening in the third or fourth round.
When people get scared.
Maybe probably third.
But then there's also that later run. There's also that later run on lower quarterbacks because people are scared of missing out, and then all of a sudden you miss out.
So all right, so we look at that next tier. We look at that next tier, right?
It's always good to stay. If you're on the back half of the run, it's always good to stay out of the run and just
wait.
Go to a different position altogether. But like I said, with those 4 guys or those 5 guys, there is every single one of those quarterbacks in their career so far in the NFL has put up stellar enough numbers that it doesn't seem unreasonable to take them. I get the Lamar Jackson dilemma and the situation there, but
see, I actually want to. I think Allen's the bigger dilemma.
Exactly.
See, this is my thing, because we all kind of just assume Buffalo's winning that division again. And I'm not so sure. Buffalo, I need to see the schedule first. Because first of all, let's look at this receiving core. Aside from
Coleman looks pretty dope.
Yeah, all right. Aside from him, Shakira and Curtis Samuels are your 2 and 3.
Yep.
Like, Dalton Kincaid better be their number 2 pass catcher this year. And even at that being said, the only way Josh Allen dominates is if he scores 10-plus rushing touchdowns.
That's fine. And
this passing offense is going to be limited.
But again, that's why you're drafting him that high.
No. I'm saying I think that there is a very good chance that this is going to be similar to last year, which, again, I called, you're welcome, when I said Mahomes was going to take a giant step back because Kansas City ain't going to score as many points in last year, 2023, compared to 2022. I believe that Buffalo is in the same camp. Their 24 team is going to be at least a touchdown behind the 23 team, which means as default, it's not a running back that's scoring less touchdowns. It's going to be passing touchdowns that diminish. And as I look at this, I'm kind of leaning to the fact that Allen is the one who's overrated more than any of them. Lamar's close, but Allen is there. And you look at what Kansas City or what Buffalo did in their draft. What did they do? First round pick, receiver. Absolutely, they needed one. Second round pick, safety. Then defensive line, running back, who's probably not hitting the field very soon, and then developmental guys from thereafter. This is a team that really all in is putting resources on that defensive side, essentially acknowledging that they have of the contenders, the worst receiving core. Like, you compare this receiving core to the Jets, nah. You compare this receiving core to Miami, absolutely not. It doesn't compare. you can take the backups for each position for Kansas City being both Sky Moore and Sky Moore would be a starter on this team.
Don't go that far, but your point is proven.
I'm not. Sky Moore would start over Curtis Samuel. I'm 100% sure of that.
So your point is proven there, and so Allen is definitely going to be valued higher because of just his general consistency over the last several years in terms of producing high value games, and so.
But so is Stroud, and Stroud's going to keep developing.
But I wouldn't, and this is the same situation as last year, insofar as you were saying that Mahomes was being considered in the second round, and Jalen Hurts was the guy who kind of in terms of fantasy draft circles, you benefited a little bit more from taking Jalen Hurts both times. Now Jalen Hurts' situation has changed. The offensive line situation has changed.
And we do like 3 shows on Philly.
We can. I think it's fair to say though that this early quarterback run is a little bit landminey because you look at it and you say, okay, the ones that you really want, Mahomes and Stroud, the only question is that how are other people valuing them? Because that's the whole point here when we talk about these ADPs and consensus ideas, is that you can have Joe from down the street, and Joe from down the street says, hey, yo, I like Patrick Mahomes, and I just got Christian McCaffrey in the first round. Screw it. Patrick Mahomes, second round. Come back around third round and be like, I don't have a wide receiver yet. Let me take DK Metcalf or something like that.
Let me hit upon this point because I want to throw this out there. For best ball leagues, I get that. And the reason I get that is in best ball leagues, there are a ton of all or nothing receivers.
Oh, yeah.
And you just stash your receiver you just stash your entire end of the roster.
Quarterbacks tend to fall a little bit more in best ball leagues.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is if you get a stud or maybe even 2 of them in your top 6 picks, you go running back and then you just take receiver the entire rest of the draft. You take your all or nothing guys. And your best ball league will balance.
I wouldn't say the entire rest of the draft in best ball leagues, but I get the point you're trying to make.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is very important, especially when we look at these younger quarterbacks coming out into the world here that are drastically affecting certain situations and nominally affecting other situations.
Mm-hmm.
Drake May, there's no situation really to affect. There's nobody there really other than Stevenson of fantasy relevance. They drafted Polk, but I think it's going to take.
Let me just say this about Drake May. He might be the most talented prospect.
I don't want to talk about Drake May. I don't want to talk about Drake May. The reason I'm bringing him up is the fantasy situations. We go then look at Jaden Daniels. That situation could drastically change for the running back room and the wide receiving core. Just based upon the way that Jaden Daniels plays.
Well, Jaden Daniels is worth 7 points a game. Drake May is worth 2.5. I mean, that's the difference.
Then we go and we look at some of these other quarterbacks, like we touched on with JJ McCarthy. His situation is fairly good. Then we go to the biggest prize of this year's draft for most of the NFL is I'm not touching that at all. Sorry. But it's
that's what she's
Caleb Williams. This situation in Chicago, we touched on it last week about Chicago, is that, the thing about Chicago this year is that because of Caleb Williams going to Chicago, all of these players are going to be overvalued because last year they were extremely undervalued. DJ Moore, you could have got him in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds of leagues last year because we weren't sure about the situation. Keenan Allen, another one coming over from the Chargers, was being drafted in the 3rd, 4th round of this past year's draft. Keenan Allen currently on Fantasy Pros has a wide receiver 25 grade.
Why? He's going to play 6 games.
DJ Moore has a wide receiver 14. So these guys are, and they're going to be. And here's the thing: if Caleb Williams starts playing camp really, really well,
he will.
These guys are going to go up. And then
yeah, and they shouldn't.
you look at DeAndre Swift, you look at Khalil Herbert, you look at Cole Kmet, and then you looked at they got Rome Odunze as well, which is not going to be. I don't think he's going to be a good pick this year for fantasy purposes, unless you're in a dynasty or a rookie redraft kind of thing. But when you look at this core, this is all of a sudden skyrocketed, Joe, to being a potentially deadly offense in the NFC North. We know your perspective, Joe. We're not going to get to the weather of the NFC North right now, but
I'm not even getting there.
I want to talk about
based on some basic facts.
I want to talk about these wide receivers, not Caleb Williams.
Okay. All right. So sticking strictly to receivers. Okay.
Sticking strictly to these wide receivers.
DJ Moore is much more talented than people were giving him credit entering last year's draft. But he is the pendulum now. Because so many people had FOMO on him, they're going to overcompensate on him.
Agreed, Tamsin, yeah.
You're 100% right on that on DJ Moore. Keenan Allen is a dinosaur that's already half turned into oil. Like, he is done. He is the most flashy free agency. They ain't going to do anything. So, yeah, he's a wasted pick. Odunze. Here's my thing with this.
Glitched there. You glitched there for a minute.
I glitched because I'm trying to figure out how to say this without talking about the quarterback. He himself, I believe, wasn't even the best receiver on his team. Starting point. Correction. He was on Washington. He definitely was the best one on his team.
Yeah, but he was definitely the best one on his team.
You look at what he was getting. It was perfect ball placement. Just
too many shandy.
Not enough shandy, baby. Bob, you're making this so hard not talking about Williams. I got to tell you this. But
Joe,
Odunze is incredibly talented.
Yeah.
The problem is he's the same mold as Moore. They are. They're not an overjump you. They're a twitch get open. And they don't have the guy who can push it. So either you're going to have to do differentiation of one of you is the medium and one of you is the deep, which neither one's really built for. Or you're going to say Keenan Allen's the worst signing that we've ever done, and he's never going to get the ball, and one of you goes to do the underneaths to do the move the sticks. Either way, they're not going to have enough first downs to feed three mouths, let alone Cole Kmet. And you look at this and say, it's not a scenario where it's going to be valued correctly. It's way too much overhype, and you're probably better off when you look at all of the consensus ratings of just saying, roll of thumb, he's a bear, he's overrated. And
yeah,
9 times out of 10, you're going to be right.
With Odunze here, he's going, a consensus right now has him as wide receiver 41 from Fantasy
Absolutely
Pro.
not.
Jackson Smith and Jigba is in the same vein. I'd rather have Jordan Addison. I won't want Cortland Sutton. The next best wide receiver we see coming off the board, no Tyler Lockett, no Christian Watson. Outside of that would be
I'm pausing on this one here real quick, Bob.
So
first off, Odunze's not the number 2 receiver on this team by any chance. There's no scenario at the end of the year he is the number 2. Even if Keenan Allen gets hurt. At the end of the year, he won't be. He still won't be because Keenan Allen always hovers. He gets hurt, then he comes back.
I agree with that. I agree with Tamsin on this one.
The second is that Njigba will be the number 2 on his team by the end of the year. And Cortland Sutton, by default, is a top 2 receiver on Denver.
But
so you just take Cortland Sutton.
The problem is taking the best guy from the worst team isn't a situation that you want to be in.
I know it works really good for Devontae Adams.
So Devontae Adams, though, is not Cortland Sutton.
Devontae Adams is a talented top 5 player in the league.
Don't you dare say that. What I'm trying to communicate here is that when I look at the board as the board could stretch out, taking a chance on Rome Odunze would mean potentially missing out on a guy like Tajay Spears. It
No.
could potentially mean missing out on maybe a resurgence of Kyle Pitts, or even missing out on Jaylen Warren, or maybe even Nick Chubb, depending on what's going on with that injury.
Warren, I take Warren.
And
I would not take Chubb.
I will say that, out of all those guys, if I had my pick of the litter, like I said earlier, I'd rather have Jordan Addison over Odunze.
Yeah.
Now, do I think that maybe Odunze has, a season where there's maybe 500-600 yards and 2 touchdowns and maybe 40 or 30 receptions? Sure. I think that's something that Caleb Williams could produce for the Bears. But what I'm more concerned about here, though, is how high DJ Moore went, because when we go and we look at DJ Moore this past season, I was an owner of DJ Moore. He was my third wide receiver. I ended up trading him after his monster 50-point game. And I traded him away, and I got Travis Etienne and a couple other value picks there.
Can I just put a pause on that 50-point game in itself? A big part of that was they couldn't tackle. He got something like 60 yards after contact. That's not catch. That's contact.
It was crazy.
They tried to tackle him, and he kept running.
Now, granted, Justin Fields and Caleb Williams, different quarterback situation. But from that 3-touchdown, 230-yard game on, he only started to crack again back to 90 yards in week 11. So he went from week 5 to week 11, and he was stabilized somewhere in the range of 9 to 13 points every week as a fantasy wide receiver. Now,
yeah, Bob, you're really leading me down the road to just tell the truth to Chicago again. And they hated me for it last year. It took us like 2 months to have Chicago return to us.
I would be concerned about that as my second wide receiver or my first wide receiver taken, like if I had to take him in the second round. But if he were to somehow fall or whatever, and you got him as a third wide receiver, I don't really see a problem with DJ Moore at a third wide receiver kind of value. But as a second or first wide receiver, I do have a problem.
See, you're going by receiver on the depth chart. I'm going by the cost of when I get
No. I'm not going by.
If I got to get him in the 5th round.
I'm going by when I look at my team, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm specifically only looking at Chicago wide receivers, not any of these other wide receivers that are out there, okay?
Yeah.
So let's say in the first round.
But what I'm saying is getting DJ Moore as a 5th round pick as my third receiver and getting him as my 3rd round pick as a third receiver, to me, is a night and day conversation.
It is. It is a night and day
There's
conversation.
still a third receiver on my roster at the end of the day.
It is a night and day conversation, Joe, but only if you consider certain players in that discussion, okay? Let me bring this up because it does have a point.
Hit me with knowledge.
Right now on Fantasy Pros ADP, like we've been using for the whole episode here, these are the same players being drafted around DJ Moore. Of course, you would want Kyron Williams. We've already established that. Michael Pittman is in that same category. Of course, we both like Brandon Ayuk for different reasons. Mm-hmm. Chris Olave is also in that same category. He
Love
goes
Olave.
Up to listen, so Devontae Adams starts this. He's at 16, okay? So you have in the Fantasy Pros list, again, this is their list overall. Fantasy Pros list has Devontae at 16, Olave at 17, and I'm only reading off the wide receivers. Brandon Ayuk at 18, Pittman at 20, DJ Moore at 22, London at 24, Evans at 25, Debo at 27, Nico at 29, and Waddle at 32. Of course, I know you like Waddle. I don't want to get into Waddle right now. From that running back perspective, again, talking a little bit as it relates to the running back, we have Kyron, we have Etienne, who you're not too big on. No. We have Josh Jacobs, who you're a little bit more big on. Mm-hmm. Derrick Henry, who you like. Pacheco, who you like. So why I go into this is that DJ Moore, you could potentially pair DJ Moore up and already have, like, say you have Breece Hall coming back around in that second round. You might go after a guy like, Saquon or something like that. Coming back around in the third round, if DJ Moore happens to be sitting there for you as your number one wide receiver, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that. But if for some reason I decide to go, let's say I went,
and Bob, that's a very good point.
Brown, then a running back.
Put a tip on that point. It's because you can't have volatility from your number one receiver. You can have volatility in your home run from your second and your third. That's your point, and that's why this makes sense.
Yeah. So, like,
I just don't believe that he's going to come anywhere near averaging what he did last year for so many reasons. A, there's now a legitimate pass catcher other than him on the roster.
But they
did not have a number 2 receiver last year. They didn't. And Moore was getting extra balls thrown his way as a result. Granted, not as extreme as Metcalf, but he was. So now you have a completely new quarterback. Granted, the same weak, inferior head coach.
Getting a lot of
you have a new quarterback who's going to spread the ball around to his new BFF in Odunze and to the veteran Allen, who's the senior citizen in the room. So you're going to pass the ball around, spread to 2 more parts instead of 1 more part. I just don't see a scenario, especially if Odunze looks similar, where Moore is still there. And then the other caveat, not to just completely rain on the entire Chicago parade, was Carolina thought they had the best quarterback in the draft last year too, and we all know they're drafting one with the first pick overall next year. So that does happen, and Chicago ain't that different in terms of their quarterback evaluation quality.
Yeah,
we'll talk to you again next offseason in Chicago.
Yeah, and the thing, and let's not belabor the point of Chicago anymore, because we did touch a little bit on Keenan Allen, but he's definitely, when you consider DJ Moore here, and then you also consider Keenan Allen, then you also consider Rome Odunze, it's just if you take DJ Moore as your number 1 wide receiver, I think you're going to be in for disappointment. But if you take him as a number 2 or 3, I think that there are going to be games where he pops off, but I think, like we said, it's way high value for him. And it's just,
I don't think you're going to have too many playoff made teams that draft DJ Moore before the 5th round.
All right, Joe, lay one on me.
Yeah. So
I've been peppering you with a lot of questions.
You have been peppering me. I've been loving it. I love it when you throw it at me. So Bob, let's go here.
That was a weird way to say that.
All right. What's a weird way to say that?
I love when you throw it at me.
I don't want to get into speculation because there'll be a couple ones down the week for trades the team should do but hasn't yet. But I do want to get into why am I blanking here? It's not loaded.
Load it up, baby.
It's loading. There we go. So I want to get into the scenario here of the Ravens. I want to get in here for a couple of different reasons.
Why?
First off, they were the best team entering the playoffs last year. But when you, and this might get a little deep offensive line talk for a minute, so I apologize to everyone up front. But when you look at the way that they have drafted their line, they have 3 speed guys and 2 maulers that, quite frankly, cannot move their feet to save their lives. The Falele is like 5,000 pounds and is a just boulder that takes forever to run around. But their 2nd round pick is essentially more of a finesse Linderbaum type who can get into space. Mm-hmm. I bring this up specifically because they're good in space for doing an outside zone stretch play, which is where Lamar runs it. But they got Henry who's powering up the middle, and they're losing their ability to do pass protection. Have the Ravens essentially resign themselves to being option up the middle with either Henry or Lamar running out the outside, or wide receiver screen equivalent to Zay Flowers, all getting to the individual person I want to bring up, which is Rashad Bateman. Is there any value in looking at Bateman?
No. I mean,
because he's the number 2 on their team.
Again,
in terms of receivers.
Again, that's fine. He can be the number 2 on the team. But as we established already in previous episodes, that just taking him because he's the number 2 doesn't mean it's going to happen. Taking the number 2 on Cleveland means it meant nothing. It meant nothing.
I think I'd rather have Judy than Bateman.
No, I meant last year, right? So
you mean the law firm, Donovan Peoples-Jones.
You go into this discussion now. Rashad Bateman, according to Fantasy Pros, is sitting at overall player 176, wide receiver 72. So when I look at, for example, when we look at, okay, what's this depth chart looking like going into next year? And this is from Pro Football Network. You got you got Derrick Henry, like you said, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar. And if I were to pull up the stats for Bateman from last
year. And then no one else, by the way. Aguilar's already a reach. There's no one after that.
If we are to pull up the stats from Bateman last year, I mean, why? 32 receptions, 367 yards, and a touchdown. That's not going to get any better. I mean, granted, the OC it has changed, but that's not going to improve. Those numbers, even if those numbers improve, they're probably going to go up to maybe 42 for 400 yards. Now, value-wise, okay. If I'm looking at a player in the 15th, 16th, 17th round that might have some upside, it's not Rashad Bateman. If I'm going through this list of players that I would rather have that are not Rashad Bateman, hold on, let me go back up because I just.
Well, let me give you the Ravens sleeper worth having that's not named Rashad Bateman. This might have been a setup to get to the guy I did want to talk about.
Okay, so Joe, in this same category, we're talking about. I know that I believe Dallas just re-signed Zeke again.
They did, which we're going to talk about in the future.
We have guys like Rico Dowdle in the same discussion here. We have big sleeper tight end in Cade Otton. You have Quentin Johnston potentially being in the same category. Derek Carr, Brian Thomas, Shaheed, Shakir.
Shakir should be a mile ahead of him.
But again, when I'm that deep, I'm not looking for a low floor. I'm looking for a high ceiling. And Rashad Bateman, there's no pathway for Rashad Bateman to a high ceiling, because if he did have a pathway to a high ceiling, they would have already found it. They would have already have.
Well, they tried to find it that whole playoff game as they couldn't complete a pass. And they found the best time to explore.
So what I would say to you, if I were looking at any Ravens player outside of Lamar Jackson, it would definitely be Zay and Henry, because while Henry, I mean, Gus Edwards went for 800 yards, 10 touchdowns. That's pedestrian Derrick Henry numbers, as we know.
Well, pedestrian Henry.
But I mean, again, pedestrian numbers. Derrick Henry could definitely do that, with a mild jaunt, even though his yards after carry were not really great. And Zay Flowers, as we've established last year, he's one of those guys that's going to get 4 catches and like 25 yards, which is stupid. Mm-hmm. But will his role expand this year with having another offseason with Lamar Jackson? Currently, he's going at wide receiver 28 in the same vein as Malik Neighbors, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, and Rishi Rice, like we said, according to this ADP, and Keenan Allen. Would I want to take a chance on Zay Flowers at that round? Probably not. But if I were able to get him in the 6th or 7th round after I kind of filled out the rest of my lineup, I think Zay Flowers is a wide receiver 3, more so as a flex. I would like Zay Flowers as a flex, which would then put him in that 7th, 8th round category, and I don't think that that's going to happen. But he's a perfectly capable player that I think that if there's anybody on the Baltimore roster that's going to put up better numbers than they did last year, it would be Zay Flowers.
Yeah, Bob, I actually go in a different direction. If there's only one Raven I have to have, it's not Henry. It's actually Isaiah Likely. I'm going deep cut here. I'm going for 2 reasons.
Always with those.
First is that you can get it super late. Second is that I think he's actually a better tight end already than Andrews. and I know Andrews is going to get hurt.
Disagree.
So I can get the effective quality opportunity of a top 5 tight end and get him buried late. That guy is the guy from the. I bring him up because Bateman's getting questions about him, and I really think that. Well, good, yeah. I do think that Isaiah is the better direction to look at, just for that. Like I said, he's going to be in an opportunity to perform, and I already think he's more talented than Andrews. Again, I think overall when you look at the Ravens are a spot on the climb. So, Bob, as we bring it back, we have about 15 minutes left in this.
Just bringing this up.
Yeah, Brent.
Rashad Bateman has played in two seasons. 285 yards season number 1, 367 yards season number 2. The guy, even in a run-heavy system, we see wide receivers tend to put down lower numbers, but then, maybe it's like 800 yards, maybe it's like 900 yards, something like that in the run-heavy system. This guy had the chance and still can't do it. Then he gets hurt. I just don't. It's just not worth it. I'm getting so mad about somebody completely irrelevant that it's just boggles the mind. Before we go off the air for today, I do want to touch on just a couple situations really quickly that really didn't change.
Sure.
As opposed to the NFL draft here. Houston.
Take Rashad Bateman off that screen real quick. Sorry he upset you so deeply.
Houston didn't change much. We have so much fluidity before the draft happened, but this
had so much growth before it. You're right.
This is going to be a good situation for C.J. Stroud, and maybe not for the wide receivers at their values, but that's going to be good. Seattle. I feel like Seattle didn't do anything.
Didn't.
I just feel that when I look at Seattle, that their situation going into the draft is very much the same as them coming out of the draft. Granted, they got a couple of guys that could benefit them, especially on defense. But offensively, there's just not a lot of shifting that I think is going to happen there in Seattle. And then when we wrap up here, thinking about another group of players that the situation really hasn't changed much is Green Bay. Green Bay going from the draft day to through this NFL draft itself, we're still looking
let's compare those two real quick, because I think that it needs to be made, is that we look at Seattle. They're the team we thought was on the rise last year, and I see them as the air is out of the balloon and they're going to be plummeting. And that Packers team is skyrocketing.
They're on complete opposite ends of the spectrum.
From a fantasy perspective, there are 4 receivers that all could be that high volume upside, the antithesis of Bateman that you just discussed. But on Seattle, Metcalf is not getting that high of a target volume again. He needs to be downgraded. Lockett, I've hated on him his whole career, is not an NFL player. And Jigba's the one who has upside. But when you look at it and go, the bloom is off the rose of Walker, I don't see a desire to want to jump on the Geno Smith bandwagon, even knowing all of the targets, with the exception of maybe in Jigba, are overvalued in the same way as Chicago is. But in Green Bay, I see upside, again, because there's 4 of them, on all of them, basically. Granted, I'm cooler on Watson than most are. But I look at the difference of those 2 rosters. Sure, they didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. But Green Bay, I think, you didn't need to. You're a team on the rise. All of your guys are in a great position. And I look at Seattle being like, What you took a D tackle with your first pick? You don't have a quarterback. You don't have a running back. You don't really have a line that's any good. And then a draft that was loaded with offensive linemen. You didn't even touch it.
Well,
it's
the
what
Seahawks
is
did
Seattle doing?
The Seahawks did touch it. They got a second.
They got a third rounder. Yeah, I get that.
And they got a later guard as well. But like I said, the reason I brought those two teams up is because the Packers went out there in the first round, got themselves an offensive lineman. They went out in the second round, got another linebacker, went out, got a safety. They're addressing these positions of need, and then they take a luxury pick in the third round. Then they go back to linebackers and safeties and stuff like that in the offensive line. The reason I wanted to compare those two is because, the first Packer off the board is most likely going to be Josh Jacobs. The first Seahawk off the board will most likely be Metcalf, but the closest Seahawk off the board will be Kenneth Walker. Is that we are drafting Seahawks over Packers.
And that's stupid.
Which is, I get that the Packers room is loaded and there's a lot of question marks and things like that. But to the point of a DK Metcalf here is that DK Metcalf went from 2022 90 receptions to 2023 66 receptions.
With an increase in targets.
And we've got Jackson Smith there, and it's just as a fluid situation as Green Bay's, but Green Bay's situation has a better quarterback attached to it.
Well, that's the difference. Yeah.
When I look at it, I'm saying, and I'm looking here, and he's been staring at me all episode. Is DK Metcalf, because he's in that wide receiver 21. Would I rather have DK Metcalf or Devonta Smith, or would I rather have DK Metcalf or Derrick Henry, or DK Metcalf or Cooper Kupp? But he's sitting right. The reason I brought this up is that he's sitting right in that round where those quarterbacks are, and it just feels like all these guys in the same: Jacobs, White, Diggs, Henry, Metcalf, Pacheco, Smith, Cooper, Kupp. Not Cooper Kupp, but Cooper.
I got it.
Kupp.
Yeah.
Then McBride. These are all players that, historically speaking, have put up really monster seasons at some point in time, with the exception of Rachaad White and Trey McBride and Pacheco. That this seems to be the round of reclaimed goods. Would I want to take a reclaimed good, go after a higher position of value, even though it might cost me in my wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, or running back 2 face, and then come back and just avoid it? Just avoid it by taking a quarterback. And this is kind of where that avoid it by taking a tight end, like in Sam Laporta, has some traction.
Oh no, you're totally right.
It's let me hit on
Metcalf proper in the Seattle situation proper, but you're totally right when we're looking at Metcalf as the alternative.
And we're gonna do some mocks and together.
We're not doing mocks. We're doing money on the table best ball. We're showing the audience where we're at.
But, with best ball, it's, different a little bit than redraft there. So.
It is a little bit, but still, at least you're getting a feel with money on the table rather than just sleepers.
I'm just so curious, come July, where these actual ADPs are going to fall, because there's just some players that just seem out of place for the ADP that is currently at. Like, for example,
Metcalf's all names. So I want to hit on this. I am willing to bet that at least 2 people in your draft are not going to know Pete Carroll's not the head coach of the Seahawks. And Metcalf is there because of name recognition and name value.
Okay.
He was over-targeted last year. His quarterback is by far bottom 5 in the league. And there is a real chance that we're going to be seeing a scenario where it's like, well, we might as well just see if Sam Howell has anything whenever we get to the end of the season after Geno Smith gets destroyed by the Niners, and we'll probably be in a mid-November game.
Couple of things.
Do I want a receiver from that situation? No, they can't block. Metcalf is not going to get as many targets as last time.
Let's not go in on Metcalf right now because I do want to save that.
Sorry, I was just going to hate on Seattle for a while. This will be great.
But here's the other rub here too, Joe, is that when I look at these, the overall for Josh Jacobs is running back 9, pick at position number 34, but he's in whatever's been happening, and this is where the interesting comes in at. Patrick Mahomes, the best ADP he's been at was 18. The worst was 48. Josh Jacobs, the best at 17, worst at 49. And Derrick Henry, best at 17, worst at 55. And then you have guys like DK, where the best is 35, the worst is 47.
Yeah, that's name recognition.
And yeah, exactly. That's what I'm bringing up is that you look at it and you say, okay, well, that's the name. That's the name keeping him up there because realistically speaking, and Devonta Smith is in here too. 36, worst is 50. Amari Cooper, best is 30, worst is 58. There's that play happening where, I'm going to be considering guys maybe a round or two before other people, just because it's, again, a guy like Dalton Kincaid, overall rank of 72, going anywhere from pick 48 to pick 96, which is crazy. Tight ends definitely have more disparity there. But looking at players when we do this, and we can talk more about it next time, is looking at that kind of grouping of players where people think their highest point could be. Because Cooper Kupp's another one of those guys where people are taking him as high as 19, but as low as 59. So it's just interesting to think about. Another guy, Drake London, high as 14, lowest at 50. But his ADP is normalized around wide receiver 15, overall number 24. I don't think that's going to happen, despite what my
Let me hit on the macro trend from there. It was in the very beginning of what you said. You said receiver number 9 going in the 4th, or running back number 9 going in the 4th round. That certainly will not happen.
No, that won't happen. Absolutely not.
So you're going to see as a result the Metcalfs of the world overall should be pushed back to the 6th and 7th round, but someone with name recognition is going to pop them in the 5th, and they're going to lose because of it.
More likely, yeah, it's more likely going to get them in the 4th, and as their wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. As I see someone who's taking Metcalf, I would definitely see as them being a person that would run a wide receiver heavy kind of draft, probably in the 1st round, taking AJ Brown or Garrett Wilson, coming back, taking Puka Nacua, and then going out and getting DK Metcalf. And the same discussion that I had about DJ Moore with you, I think to a lesser extent could be also applied to DK Metcalf.
Dude, to a degree of magnitude, I'd rather have DJ more than Metcalf. I mean, degree of magnitude.
As I'm saying though, the same type of debate could be had is while I don't want DK Metcalf as my number 1 overall wide receiver, I don't really logistically have a problem as my 3rd wide receiver. But if he's my 3rd wide receiver and I have to take him in the 4th round, then something else has happened in my draft.
And it all depends on the round you got to get him.
Hey, Memes.
What's up, Memes? Who you got? What's going on?
Tell us who you got, because we're about to go off air for the day.
You got yourself 2 minutes. You better type fast, baby.
Who did you grab? Let us know, because we are really curious. I'm betting if you're back, you went and took Wilson.
Should have.
But so for anybody who joined us today, we are going to be back next week. We usually start around 3:45, 4 o'clock. Today was a little bit of a late start, and we usually go till 6 o'clock. We will answer Memes' question here.
And we also missed the elephant in the room, Bob.
What's the elephant in the room?
Penix.
Oh, Penix. Are you comfortable giving up Evan Ingram and the 24th and 2024's 3rd round, 10th overall pick for the 2024 pick 212 to get Corley or Polk or Roman? Didn't pick yet. Getting another 2nd round. So
you didn't do your pick yet for where you were going to get Wilson.
Okay. now that you said that, here's actually what I would. Here's what I
I'm
would actually.
definitely okay giving up Evan Ingram. Let's just start with it.
Yeah, I am. He had a really high production last year because it was basically like, well, this wide receiver situation is not working out the way that we thought. And when it comes down to you already having Mark Andrews, now Joe will tell you a couple things about Mark Andrews probably next week. He already touched on it a little bit this week. He likes Isaiah Likely a lot. Yeah, if I were you, I would be okay with this trade. I think that Evan Ingram has a decent enough chunk of value this year, but
I disagree. They brought in Gabe Davis, and their first pick was receiver.
Like I said, a decent, not good, decent. So trading him now to not lead you into that dilemma of Mark Andrews or Evan Ingram on a week-to-week basis is probably going to be a big benefit to you. And going out there and getting guys that you like Corley, getting Roman, to get two of these guys instead of just having Evan Ingram, who, in a couple years will be on the way out too. I think it's a solid play. I think
it's a no-brainer. You're essentially trading a streaming tight end to move an entire round.
Well,
higher.
He wasn't a streaming tight end last year, but
he is this year.
He could return to that this year.
No, he is.
I don't think it will happen, but I think it's good. I think if you go with this, then you get yourself set in and you don't, and then your heart situation is still there where you're saying, I like Corley. I want to take Corley. I do like Roman too. I take both of them. Then it's not even a debate, not even a discussion. You made a good choice, and you don't even have to look back at Evan Ingram because you already have Mark Andrews. You're probably going to go out and do some more trades to maybe beef up that tight end room, maybe even trade Mark Andrews later on for a better, younger tight end, which maybe, going out and potentially getting a guy like Brock Bowers or something like that could be a move in the future. But I think it's a good move. I think you'll be solidly play. Check in with us next week. Let us know what you ended up getting. And even post your draft. Send us your draft so we can see how that whole draft shook out, and just use it as a kind of talking point for next week's episode when we talk a little bit more about some players that maybe we didn't touch on today, including Michael Penix Jr., the Kirk Cousins debate, touching on a little bit of the Philadelphia situation. And, we haven't talked about them yet because it's almost a completely irrelevant team for fantasy purposes. But the New York Giants are still a team in the NFL that we have not discussed any players, with their highest player being Malik Neighbors at potentially wide receiver 29, which is crazy. So join us next week. We'll be back same time, same place.
You have to end on a Giants note? Why did you have to do that to me, Bob?
We just did. I mean, it happens. Sometimes you can't always end things well. I mean, you ended with a Penix and with the Giants. I think it's a good combination. One of them is ass. So which